welcome back to another discussion session right here at the APVA Awards 2023. I hope you've been enjoying the show so far because I have been enjoying it. And we're back to talk with one of our guests at the event this year. Today, my guest is someone who I know well because he's part of the team at APVA, and he happens to be a judge on this year's edition of the podcast, such as like last year as well. But this time around, we're going to be talking about the process of judging and his perspective into this. This personality that I'm talking about is a podcast head in Africa. He's the country representative for APVA here in Nigeria, and he has a podcast called Into the Podverse. He also has a newsletter called Podcast Related. If you follow podcasting in Africa very well, you already know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about no other person than the prolific Tony Doe. Hi, Tony. It's a pleasure having you today.
Hi, Tobu.
Yeah, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me. Thank
Great.
you.
Great. And thank you for all you've been doing for the podcast community here in Africa. We see it every time, and we're proud of you.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So speaking of what you've been doing for the podcast community, in the context of the APVA Awards, you happen to be a judge at this year's APVA Awards. And I mean, I know it's a process. It's a whole process. So we're curious to
It
know
is.
what went into, being a judge, like practically how you were able to execute this. And I believe that you were a judge at the podcast category. So give us a feel of what it was like for you.
Okay, well, first of all, this is the second awards we're having. And in the first, I was also a judge as well, same category. And we had some parameters we were given to work with. And we basically just enjoyed the number of podcasts that came through our desks. And for me, especially, it was an opportunity to actually discover some really great podcasts. So I liked the idea that fans had control in the first place in choosing which of their favorites should be nominated. And then we began to review those that were selected. So for me, it was basically about looking at the content itself. A situation like, say, you buy a box of cereal or you buy a pack of, well, I wanted to call it brand name, but I'm not giving them free ads. You buy a box of cereal, and on the cover, they tell you this is what is inside the box, and then you open it, and then you verify that that's exactly what's inside the box. So that's what I was particularly looking for with podcasts, and this is where it's really important when we tell podcasters to pay attention to their show descriptions. This is what we're talking about. If your show description doesn't match your content, you have a problem and you'll probably lose listeners. Another thing I was looking out for, because I'm pretty particular about audio quality, is clarity, background noise management, the use of music and sound effects for ambience and carrying the story along. And I also liked, I was looking out particularly for how the podcasts started. If there was a strong, catchy introduction, that was important to me as well. And surprisingly, or well, unsurprisingly, most of the podcasts I listened to really held that down, and it was a beautiful thing to witness. We had more podcast categories. I think I'm not sure we increased. Okay, we had an extra category this year. I think that was the one we cover art, but we had more podcasts in the different categories this year than we did last year. So it was rigorous, but it was also enjoyable. And yeah, I really enjoyed discovering and enjoying these podcasts.
That's an interesting one. Now, I know that you're someone that takes metrics very seriously. Like I've seen you involved in trying to gather some data over and over again for the podcast community and sometimes for radio as well. So let's talk about a few things that you've learned in this process of reviewing or going through hundreds of podcasts, I would guess, right, in Africa,
Mm.
through this award judging process. So what are the things that stood out for you that you can say, wow, having gone through this for the second time, I can say, I can infer that this and this and this is consistent. This is what have learned from the podcast industry.
I would say maybe the format has been consistent. Most of the stuff we listen to usually interview based. You have a host with a co-host and then a guest. So that has been pretty consistent. And then I'm beginning to see a lot more storytelling coming into the space.
All right. Now
Yeah, it is. It is.
let's talk about the like what you call pet peeves. But in this context, uh, let's look at it from the perspective of as a judge, you're listening to this podcast, you're trying to find out if it fits into the category as the best in that category, and then you hear certain things and you're like, oh no, oh no. So, what are those
Mm.
things that you can say they just kind of spoil the show in terms of the podcast? So the person has been doing greatly and then they did this thing and you're like, no, podcasters shouldn't be doing this, and it's a thumbs down for them any day, anytime.
Um, Talking over each other,
Hmm.
and that's pretty common among a lot of podcasts. I find it distracting because if I'm trying to figure out what one person is saying and then somebody else is interrupting, you're not respecting me as the listener. It's fine if you're having an argument and I'm not welcome to the conversation, but once you've made it something for me to consume, then you should pay attention to the fact that I am also ingesting this bit of conversation. And as much as you think your position is valid, I also think the other person's position is valid as well. Allow me the space to consume both positions and then make my own decisions. And I think a lot of podcasters should start paying attention to that. You're not just performing for yourselves anymore because it is a performance, whether people like it or not. You're not performing for yourselves anymore. You're performing for an audience of one. And so if you're um, sharing a story with me, then please allow me enjoy it. If you're having a conversation, then please allow me understand where the conversation is going, and don't interrupt. Don't interrupt the experience. It's upsetting. Uh, yeah. So that's a particular one for me. It gets to me.
Mm. Okay,
Yeah.
that's a lesson to learn. Now let's talk about the significance of the award in the African space. This is the second year
Mm.
that the award is holding, and it has gained traction. What would you say are the
Yeah. It
advantages of
does.
having an award to celebrate African podcasters, voiceover artists, and spoken word artists? Overall, we could call all of us audio creatives. What are the advantages and benefits
Well,
for
audio
the
content
ecosystem?
creators. Yeah. Well, first of all, um, we have a community, and that is essential. We have a variety of talents, and it helps to have a platform that brings everybody together, and people can share ideas and offer assistance and help to each other. So yes, it helps. And apart from the community extends into a network. So if you're looking for people, let's say guests or certain skill sets that would amplify or better embellish what you're doing, then you can find it in the community. As for instance, now we have Tolu, who is one of the kings of voiceovers in Nigeria. And I want to do a podcast intro that doesn't require my voice. I could reach out to Tolu in the community and, we could work something out. Tolu also doubles as a model. So if I need to create podcast art or promotional assets for my blog, I could use Tolu's picture to tell the story. So community and networking is essential if we want to grow. And when we're able to do that, we're able to generate numbers, we're able to generate or rather we're able to curate our audiences and then eventually attract the kind of monetization that a lot of us really want and can't get at the moment.
Mm,
And this is the thing with advertisers that a lot of creators don't pay attention to. It's not what you think your show is that they're attracted to. It is your audience that they want. And one of the best ways to grow your audience is to get involved in a community and expand your reach through that community. And that's essential for what Abba is doing. Abba is creating an ecosystem that can create opportunities for audio creatives, and you can get jobs and become exceptional talents in the international market, and then you have a base that would always support you and respect what you do.
Mm. Thank you very much, Tony. First of all, I would say I'm flattered that you gave me those should I say accolades? I don't know. But then and for the context, Tolu is me. I am Tolu, although I introduced myself as T Code.
Yeah,
um,
he's T code. Yes, T code.
yeah. Now let's the last question. There's no other person that I would have asked this question except, I mean, you, of course, you fit in that. Where do you see the podcast industry in, say, 5 years? For instance, you mentioned monetizing. Now, in the context of Africa, where do you see the podcast industry in 5 years beyond just, answering about monetizing overall? What do you speculate will be?
There's going to be an incredible explosion. I don't know why I feel it would happen even before the end of this year. I think I'm going to go look for the server again. But I saw a bit of news from podcast sessions where some people conducted a survey and found out that there were about 200,000 active podcasts on the continent. It might be small compared to more established markets, but I think it's a wonderful thing. The fact that the person was even able to gather the 200,000 means that somebody's keeping track of what we're doing, and that's been one of the things I've been struggling to do. People aren't weren't really keeping tracks about these things, but it's a good thing to see that. And then you have platforms like AfriPods, which is the number one platform on the continent for African storytellers. And AfriPods is pushing real hard to ensure that creators do not need to succumb to international market standards before they can profit or feed from their content. And they want to be the platform that will ensure that creatives are paid for what they do. There's a lot going on in the tech space. I'm excited about the innovations going on in Nigeria and Kenya, especially, and I'm looking forward to seeing how those payment platforms become an integral part of the hosting platforms like AfriPods on the continent. So when you're creating something now, you're not just creating and thinking, "Ha, God, when?" or which cousin do I have in the UK to help me open PayPal? No, you create your stuff, you focus on your creativity, and then you're working with a platform that is focused and ensuring that you benefit from your content. Your content is gold, is valuable. So if you're going to get paid for it, then you should. So in the next 5 years, there will be a massive explosion, and hopefully, we'll be able to have the metrics to measure as well. And then we'll be in the news conversations that we've not been involved in. We always hear about the US podcast landscape. Every survey that has taken place this year, 99% has been on the US audience and the US creators, and nothing on the African continent this year. The only one we've had that sort of moved was last year. And I think that was Africa Podfest and Baraza Media. It's not the cheapest thing to put together. So I'm not upset that we haven't done another one since. But we're getting to that point where platforms like Edison Research, Signal Insights, and all the others would be coming here to talk to us and gather information. Earlier this year, I was at a radio summit where I had a conversation with the managing director of MPS. Now, MPS is I've forgotten, but it has to do with media services. And during my days on radio, they were the ones we depended on to find out how our ratings were doing, find out how many people were actually reaching with our broadcast signals. And it's a very incisive project. The survey is very deep rooted, and the conversation led to the point where he was like, "Oh, Tony, speaking of which, we are going to start looking at generating numbers from those who consume consume audio on demand, because we have noticed that there is an attentive audience for that. And of course, that's thanks to online radio stations extending their services to online platforms as well. The fact that you now have your mobile devices and you can listen to audio anywhere. So that podcast nature now is seeping into national census position. So it's an interesting thing to see. So we'll see a lot of numbers, and we'll see our content actually competing on international stages for awards as well. We won't just have a category for Africa. We would actually be competing in more established categories as well. So I'm excited for the future for African podcasters.
I'm really excited about all of this that you've said. And one other thing that excites me even more is when I realized that you went back into actually podcasting. I missed your other podcast that you did, which was really about radio. I listened to everything. And then, I mean, it's a brilliant podcast. I'd always been following. And now Into the Podverse is the new one for, podcast enthusiasts. So I'd encourage any other person listening right now, you should go listen to into the podcast, into the Podverse
Into the
podcast
podcast.
by Tony Doe. Speaking of which, how can people connect with you on various platforms?
Okay, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, more on LinkedIn these days. Twitter had an issue with me and I don't know, disturbed one of my profiles. But my official handle on Twitter is Tony Doe Media. I'm active on LinkedIn at Tony Doe VO or Tony Doe Onchakwa. If you're looking for me on LinkedIn, you'll probably see me pop up. I'm active on Instagram every now and then at Tony Doe Media as well.
All right. Thank
No
you so
TikTok yet.
Okay, like yet. All right. Thank you so much for your time, Tony. And it's been a pleasure talking to you. I'm T Code, and right now I want to get back to the rest of the awards. And so we'll be seen on another discussion session. But for now, let's enjoy the rest of the awards.